this morning at this SANEM conference. And the chairman of SANEM, Dr. Konkar, my colleague and very dear friend Salim Raihan, who has developed this new institution, SANEM, and friend Dr. Vinay Sen, and all the very distinguished, learned economists, young economists from all over the South Asia. It's a privilege and honor for me to be with you this morning at this fourth SANEM Annual Economists Conference. As I said earlier, I have seen SANEM grow from strength to strength over the past decade, and we have found in SANEM a very important partner at ESCAP. We have been working with SANEM in the last 4 or 5 years very closely, and every time we work with the SANEM, we get some stimulus and very interesting ideas, and that we are able to take forward to our member states. So I'm very happy to join you at this annual conference of SANEM, and look forward to many productive years of collaboration with you, Salim, and your team. So I have put together a short presentation which I will go through, and I'm sure in the later sessions we will have more discussion on some of these themes. Basically, number of new challenges that are surfacing in the world economy that affect our ability in the region to drive this agenda of 2030, comprising 17 Sustainable Development Goals and 169 targets. So I was just taking a broad sweep or look at what are the challenges and how we can surmount them to implement the 2030 agenda to get by 2030 this finishing line with all the achievements that we are expecting. So first of all, I mean very briefly, and you know it all, that despite economic dynamism of South Asian countries, and we know how robustly some of the South Asian countries, including Bangladesh and India, among others, are growing over the past few years. In fact, today, if you look around, South Asia is the fastest growing sub-region in the world. So the growth has not been an issue. And we have also achieved quite a lot under the MDG era between the turn of the century and 2015. The extent of poverty was brought down to less than half, and many other achievements. But yet, today, if you look around, South Asia is still a global hotspot of poverty. 36% of all people in the world living in extreme poverty live in South Asia. 50% of all children living with malnutrition live in South Asia. And there are many other development gaps. We don't need to talk about it. We all know, I mean, the infrastructure gaps, for instance, how a billion people still do not have access to proper sanitation, for instance. So many, deprivations, and in that context, the 2030 agenda, which promises to lift people out of extreme poverty, eliminate poverty and hunger, and provide a life of dignity to all people, not leaving anyone behind, is a godsend. It's a lifetime opportunity for South Asia to get rid of the poverty and hunger from the face of earth. But at the same time, the world also has high stakes in South Asia achieving these SDGs. Why? Because South Asia represents 25% of world's population. And if we have 36% of all poor living in extreme poverty, how on earth world can achieve SDGs without South Asia. So this is the high stake of the world in South Asia's achievement, and that is the context in which we should be talking about the global partnership and supporting South Asia in achieving SDGs. So let us look at what is happening and not happening. So obviously the agenda is agenda that SDGs put before us is quite ambitious. Let us accept that. It talks about elimination of poverty, universal access to health, education, social protection, all different basic amenities of life, including drinking water, sanitation, modern energy, housing, and it talks about infrastructure, industrialization, decent jobs for everyone, innovation and sustained economic growth, and sustainable consumption and production. So it is a very daunting and impressive or ambitious agenda before us. And it will, of course, require huge resources. There is no doubt about it. Some couple of years ago, we made an estimation in the Economic and Social Survey of Asia and the Pacific, which is the flagship of ESCAP, how much resources we will need to achieve these goals. And for the social SDGs, we got to the number between 10 to 20%, varying across countries, of GDP for achieving the social agenda itself. Then there were some estimates which were floated around about $5 trillion of investments needed to close the infrastructure gaps in South Asia. Then the nationally determined contributions for environmental, this is Paris Agenda commitments, Paris Agreement commitments, which each country has undertaken. To implement them also will require substantial resources, and India has estimated that it will need $2.5 trillion to achieve what India has committed to deliver. So altogether, you are talking of huge amount of resources, and then access to technologies to deal with the environmental commitments will also be a very important requirement if we are able to deliver. For instance, all of the South Asian countries depend upon a lot of thermal power generation, coal-fired power plants. If they are not provided access to clean coal technology, how on earth you are going to bring down the emissions? So technology access is a critical thing. Market access, especially for least developed countries like Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, Afghanistan, and other developing countries, also is going to be a very important resource or empowerment tool. Capacity building of different types so that they are able to play their role in the world economy. So when this agenda was being drafted, people were aware of the resource requirements. They were anticipating that it will require a huge amount of resources. So they built Goal 17, which was on means of implementation and revitalizing global partnership for sustainable development. And before SDGs were adopted in September, there was actually Addis Ababa Action Agenda adopted, where a very ambitious set of commitments were discussed and debated on finance, technology, capacity building, trade, systemic issues, data monitoring and accountability, and they were incorporated in this Agenda 2030. So there was a recognition that there will be need for huge amount of resources. But since the agenda has been adopted and you have seen number of trends taking shape ever since the onset of the global financial crisis in 2007-8, which are now consolidating, which tend to sort of cloud the climate for global partnership. And I will just quickly go over what are these new challenges. Firstly, since, world trade, for instance, never quite recovered from global financial crisis. You remember the years of 2003 to 2007, when global trade or world trade growth every year used to be between 15 to 18% per year, And since 2008, when this global financial crisis or Lehman Brothers collapse happened, you find that world trade growth has been growing at a very anemic rate of 2 to 3%. And this is going to be a new normal because of the tendencies of protectionism, the snowballing of that in trade wars. You are hearing a lot about trade wars, starting between US and China, but it's spreading all across. So this is something very real, a new normal of very subdued rate of growth of world trade. World trade growth earlier in this period, heady days of globalization, 2003 to 2008, growing at 15 to 20%, and was giving a stimulus to developing countries to also benefit from the fruits of globalization. Many Asian countries, accelerated their growth rate by exporting to the world, feeding the world market, which were expanding, and some became, successful exporters of manufacturing, like China. Some became successful exporters of services, like India. And so this was helping the growth of developing countries. But now all of that process is going to go down, and we have seen very anemic growth of world trade, world economy, and affecting every country's or economy's growth rate. The other thing we are noticing, and in last few years, is retreat of multilateralism. And so there is a less appetite around the world of a faith in multilateralism as a philosophy. And one very strong demonstration of that is that Doha development round, which was supposed to address the asymmetries of the world trading system. Some of them brought by Uruguay round were to be addressed by Doha development agenda, and that is stuck, completely in suspended animation. Some people are calling Doha as a dead kind of round, and but nothing is happening. And the other thing you see is widening inequalities between and within countries. And one of the goals of the 2030 agenda, goal 10, is about bringing down, reducing inequalities between and within countries. But you have completely opposite trend. And Thomas Piketty's book in 2013 was the first to highlight this growing tendency, but since then a lot has been written, including one report which we launched last year at the Commission of UN ESCAP in May 2018 on inequalities. And you see that in different forms the inequalities are widening everywhere. But one of the things which is happening is this hyper-globalization has helped the largest of the companies. And just to give you one example, Apple's market capitalization today is over $1 trillion. And if you add up market capitalization of top 5 or 10 technology companies in the United States, that their market capitalization exceeds the entire GDP of all South Asian countries put together. Just 5 to 7 companies, only 5 to 7 companies. So this is the extent of inequalities that are growing. And Oxfam has reports that some 8 individuals own a very staggering proportion of world GDP or output or incomes and all. So name anything, you find inequalities have widened very, very, very sharply. The other important trend is the aid fatigue. In the Addis Ababa Action Agenda also, there was a reiteration of this commitment of 0.7 target, which has been there since 1970s, of North-South dialogue days, and it has never been achieved. Even till date, only 6 countries, including some of the Scandinavian countries, have achieved the 0.7 target. The proportion overall for the DAC countries remains at 0.31, 32, 31, 32. And in absolute terms, the ODA levels, you see in this figure, they look like growing. But if you look at the green, which is the real ODA, it has not crossed the peak of 2005. What has grown is the red portion, which is humanitarian aid, and the blue portion, which is actually in-donor, in-country refugee assistance. So the European countries received some refugees, and so they were spending some of the aid money on them. And so that is grown, but the real ODA has not. And FDI, which was supposed to be the resource flow, which was expanding and which will take care of the resources deficits in developing countries, continues to, it has of course declined in the last few years, but it continues to remain concentrated in a handful of countries. Why? Study after study on determinants of FDI, and I used to be at one time working a lot on FDI determinants across countries, between countries, sectors and all. Any single study you pick up, you will find the biggest determinants of FDI are the level of prosperity, growth rate, urbanization, infrastructure quality. So because multinational companies, which are drivers of foreign direct investment, they pick winners. Where I can get more market, more profits, they will go there. They don't go to countries which may need these resources, but the countries which can provide them increasing opportunities for making more profits. And so they are, concentrated, and some handful of countries. And of course, countries compete, governments compete between themselves to make their investment climate more and more attractive to attract more investment. But they will decide where they are going to go to. Portfolio flows, short-term capital flows, tend to be very, very volatile, we know, and in recent times we have seen huge amount of volatility in stock markets, in exchange rates, driven by the short-term capital flows, which in turn was resulting from changes in the monetary policy of advanced economies. How much time? So they are highly volatile, and they become source of instability in any country which is hooked up with the global financial markets. And some of the countries in South Asia which are hooked up with the global financial markets, like India, you have seen a huge amount of volatility last year when rupee went down from 64 rupees to a dollar to 73 rupees to a dollar. And the other thing which very recent reports like World Economic Situation and Prospects of UNDESA, which was released last month, and the Trade and Development Report of UNCTAD. If you have seen them, these are the latest reports from UN on the world economy. You will find that they are, expressing concern or growing risks to global stability. The basic thing they are observing is that lessons were not learned from global financial crisis. The shadow banking again has gone up, over the years, and is now a huge proportion, staggering proportion of the world economy. The derivatives markets have again expanded to where they were. The fat bonuses, which drive excessive risk taking in the financial sector, are going up and up all the time. So the risks, to global stability are expanding actually. And the technology side, access to technology, which remains a major concern for implementing SDGs, because of the increasing trend of concentration or in the R&D activity, innovative activity, patents taken, whichever indicator you take, the pattern remains very highly concentrated. Only a couple of countries have managed to break into the top 5, countries like China. But still, the ownership of patents still remains very skewed in the hands of just a half a dozen countries. And what is worrying is the increasing private ownership of knowledge. So Green Revolution was implemented all across Asian countries, and some of the countries in this region benefited a lot and were able to address the hunger problem because knowledge at that time was in the hands of public funded institutions like CGIAR, but it's not the case anymore. And so this is something we need to worry about. And on top of that, this new technological revolution, the artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, the 3D printing, blockchain, all of this, is going to have huge implications for development. They are disruptive, they are going to disrupt the way the work is organized. So many jobs will disappear, new type of jobs will come in, but are we prepared for them? And so driverless cars is something you are reading a lot about. What will it imply? If Ubers of the world start to use driverless cars, how many people will be out of the job market? But much bigger threat for developing countries in this sub-region, for instance, is about reshoring of production. A lot of our production in South Asia and rest of Asia Pacific is a result of a pattern of the earlier times, which was called offshoring, outsourcing or offshoring of production of goods and services. Now, with the new tools in the hands of companies, it will be possible to move it back. 3D printing is supposed to produce 40% of world goods production by 2030 or something. So this is something we need to be prepared for. Reshoring, that production which came to South Asia and other parts of Asia, going back to the Western world. So these are some of the trends, and there are more, but I just picked up the headlines. So the combined implication of all of these is that external environment has turned less benign than at the turn of the century. And how do we address the challenge of sustainable development goals in such a less benign external environment? So what is the way forward? I mean, this is about the domestic fiscal space, expanding that. There may be some room for doing that in South Asia because tax to GDP ratios in South Asia are much lower, and there may be space for expanding the tax base, increasing some tax revenue through new innovative taxes. Some of the countries are trying that. Some are introducing green taxes, some are introducing taxes on taxes, cess for funding education or some other activities. Enhancing efficiency of public expenditure through direct benefit transfers. Again, there are some experiments going on in South Asia in that direction. And mobilizing private investments, including through corporate social responsibility. There is a new law in India, as you may have heard about, 2% of profits are to be spent on corporate social responsibility. That could be one option, and PPPs, and deepening of capital markets and all that. But I want to spend a little more time on the new avenues for global and regional cooperation. So, for instance, international tax cooperation in addressing the illicit financial flows, which are robbing developing countries of some more than $300 billion every year. We are earlier talking about ODA, which is about of the order of $140 billion in current prices. But in illicit financial flows and transfer pricing manipulation, developing countries lose every year more than $300 billion, so twice the amount of ODA that they receive. So can we do something about that? Can we create new innovative sources of revenue? And one idea which has been on the table ever since the global financial crisis struck in 2007-8, which is international financial transaction tax. Some years ago, I did some back of the envelope kind of very crude calculations that in very conservative assumptions, what could such an international financial transaction tax deliver? And I reached a figure of $650 billion per year of new revenue coming from nowhere. And this could be a very substantial resource for funding SDGs for developing countries. But on top of that, it could help in moderating the volatility of short-term capital flows. As Tobin said, this is called Tobin tax. He said, throwing sand in the wheels of this short-term capital, flows. This is very disturbing, volatile, thing. So if we can throw some sand in the wheels of that, it will slow down, and that will be another advantage of it. Then development of regional financial architecture. You have seen creation of new multilateral development banks, AIIB, the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, and the new development bank of BRICS. In the last 3 years, these two institutions have come up. It's a win-win, very new development, very interesting development that provides more options to developing countries to borrow. But there is room for more such institutions or expanded resources of such institutions, because there are huge amount of foreign exchange reserves in Asia and private savings. Net worth of high net worth individuals, or savings of these high net worth individuals are estimated to be around $7 trillion in Asia. If we can create a vehicle to harness some of that wealth for development financing, like AIIB and NDB, that could be another win-win. So the other idea is, which has also been on the table for a few years, is SAARC Development Fund we have created in Bhutan as part of the initiatives under SAARC, whether that can be turned into a development bank and it is able to borrow, raise money and lend and catalyze much bigger projects. So this is another idea to look into. Then development of regional capital markets and cross-border listings. Some of the successful companies of developing countries are able to go and raise money at NASDAQ or New York Stock Exchange. But entry barriers are very high. Only very large successful companies are able to do that. So this is not an option for most of the companies or enterprises of developing countries. But if they are able to raise money or capital in the neighboring countries, say South Asian companies able to raise money or list their securities on stock exchanges of neighboring countries, say Bombay Stock Exchange or National Stock Exchange of India and all that, that could be an option, and we may not have that high entry barriers. Fostering regional economic integration, and sorry, I forgot about harnessing the potential of South-South cooperation is another thing. The recent estimates show that this is already grown to around $25 billion a year. What is important, however, I want to underline this point, is that we need to ensure that South-South cooperation is not run on the template of North-South cooperation. It needs to have its own template, which is based on development partnership rather than donor-donee kind of relationship of the past. So this is something of a challenge for new, emerging countries which have come up on the scene, to make sure that South-South cooperation is really a partnership and not a North-South type of donor-donee relationship. And finally, exploiting the potential of regional and South-South trade. Regional and South-South trade. And if you look at the trade patterns of the recent years, of the past decade, you will find that the most dynamic part of world trade today is regional and South-South trade. 33% of all trade today is actually South-South trade. So potential of that needs to be exploited fully, because the traditional markets for goods and services are drying out, are becoming flat, as I was talking earlier, the subdued new normal, that is the pattern. And then finally, enhancing indigenous, for harnessing the technological requirements for these new agenda, sustainable development agenda. We need to invest in enhancing our indigenous absorptive and innovative capacity. However, developing countries may not have adequate resources to do that. So whatever is possible we should do, but then pooling resources for finding joint solutions for shared problems. So some of the challenges for sustainable consumption and production are common. And so we can go much farther by pooling our resources rather than each one trying to reinvent the wheel. And so this is something very important in this new context of technology access becoming a challenge, that we begin to set up joint programs to address shared challenges. We should also harness our own homegrown frugal engineering capacities. This is something, in South Asia is called jugaad. That finding a problem, finding a solution to a local problem in a less costly and affordable manner. And so there are many examples around the world, around the region, and we should harness that. And then we should engage the developed countries for a review of TRIPS agreement and the solution. TRIPS agreement, and there is actually an article in TRIPS agreement 66.2, which is about transfer of technology, but it was never spelled out fully. So we need to all together ask for a full review to ensure that provisions of TRIPS are facilitating rather than holding up transfer of technology. So with that, I conclude. Basically, just to recapitulate, the implementation of the 2030 agenda requires huge resources, and it was premised on a renewed global partnership. However, the external economic environment has turned less benign, threatening the spirit of equitable partnership. And developing countries need to exploit the potential of domestic fiscal space and find new and innovative resources and stronger global and regional partnerships for finance and technology that would be critical for achieving SDGs. And regional and South-South cooperation can play a very important role and larger role in achieving these goals. Thank you.